Good morning, boys and girls. We have a new history chapter to read today for ancient Rome. We just have 3 chapters left in our whole ancient Rome unit. It's been really fun going through from the very beginning with the story of Romulus and Remus up until pretty soon we're going to get into what's called the decline of the Roman Empire, when Rome didn't just stop existing. However, it stopped having the power and the growth that it had, when Julius Caesar and Augustus Caesar were in charge. So we're kind of nearing that ending of the Roman Empire. Today, we're going to learn about what the relationship was like between the Romans and Christians. So at this time that we're looking at in the Roman Empire, Christianity is a new religion, and we'll see how it impacted the Romans and how the Romans impacted the Christians in really sad ways. Now, remember what the Romans' main religion was? What gods and goddesses did they believe in? The Christianity and many other world religions have one god they believe in. The Romans had gods and goddesses. All of these gods, they're based off of the Greek gods. So like Jupiter is king of the gods to the ancient Romans. And they lived in fear that they would anger the gods in a lot of ways. So at this time of history, they were seeing these new Christians come in who didn't want to worship the Roman gods and goddesses because it went against their faith in one God. So the Romans were thinking, this is going to anger our gods and goddesses. So there's a lot of conflict with both sides. Now, the birth of Jesus Christ, which happened at the very beginning of AD. We've seen some of history in BC before Jesus Christ was born, but most of the Roman Empire study we've been looking at is after the birth of Christ. It took place during the rule of Augustus Caesar. Now, Jesus was tried and executed by crucifixion, which means that he was put on a cross and left to die there. In Palestine, which is near Israel. That's actually where I used to live. I taught 3rd grade there for a few years. I'm going to point it out on a map here. Right over here. So here's Rome on the coast of Italy. Palestine was right over there and still is today. So that's where he was crucified in the city of Jerusalem. And it was a Roman province. So it was an area that the Romans conquered the land of, and they had Roman rule of that area. It was under the supervision of a Roman official named Pontius Pilate. But these events, which were to have such a profound effect on later history, remained completely unnoticed in most parts of the Roman Empire. So when Jesus Christ was crucified, when he was killed, even though it led to the beginning of a major world religion, eventually, at the time, people didn't really think anything of it outside of that area. Now, it was only later, during the 1st century CE or AD, that the followers of Jesus began to move out from Palestine and throughout the Roman Empire, preaching about Jesus and making converts. So that religion started to spread outside of just that area of Palestine to other parts of the world. Now, the Apostle Paul traveled throughout the Roman Empire, preaching the necessity of faith in Jesus as the Savior. So they were starting to go about into other parts of the world more and more from that little Roman province. For the most part, the Roman Empire was tolerant of the religious practices of its subjects, meaning if people from a different province, sorry about that. If people from a different Roman province had a different religion than the Romans, they'd be okay with it for the most part. But many emperors followed the policy of the Emperor Trajan, who ordered that the Christians be left alone as long as they did not disturb the general peace. So basically they were saying, Anybody can have whatever religion they like as long as it doesn't really start to affect other people negatively. However, when times were bad, it was easy for them to blame the Christians because they were different. They worshiped a god other than all of the Roman deities, their gods and goddesses. And because they believed there was only one God, they refused to make sacrifices in honor of the pagan gods who most Romans worshipped. So they did not want to make sacrifices to those gods because it went against their faith. Also, they did not worship the emperor. The Christians' refusal to participate in religious ceremonies that were supported by the state and the emperor were often used as grounds for persecution, which we're going to see in our chapter today, which is to have other people go through some sort of great suffering because of their beliefs. Now, the first persecution of the Christians actually predated Trajan. In 64 CE, there's an emperor named Nero, who we're going to see, seeking to deflect criticism from himself, blamed the Christians for the great fire that had destroyed large parts of Rome. But they were not responsible. The Emperor Diocletian, who ruled from 284 to 305 CE, brought the full resources of the empire to bear against Christianity. He was determined to make Christians give up their practices. So it was much more extreme than the treatment towards any other religion. He wanted to have them give it up altogether. Many Christians died for their faith, and some of them were forced to fight like gladiators against one another or against wild animals. The phrase, throw the Christians to the lions, comes from this time and was originally meant literally. However, the persecutions of the Christians did not have the desired effect. Those who were executed were hailed as martyrs, and the religion continued to spread in spite of the persecution, and Christians are still the largest religious group in the world today. So that is a little background information to go along with our chapter. That is where Christianity started, and it had a really tough beginning because a lot of people were not allowed to worship the way they wanted to worship and the way they believed to be to properly worship one true God rather than Jupiter and all of the Roman gods and goddesses. They did not want to make sacrifices to them. So they went through a lot of persecution and struggles, but now it's one of the main world religions. So let's take a look at our chapter 14 in our history book today. The Romans and the Christians. Now we're getting into the story of Luciano first. It was the year 2016 in the city of Rome. The teacher looked around the classroom and began the lesson. After he defeated Antony and Cleopatra, Octavian was the ruler of the Roman world. The teacher continued. Octavian allowed the Senate to name him Augustus. He also liked the titles the first citizen of Rome and father of Rome. He never allowed the Senate to name him king, but it did not matter. The Roman Republic was gone forever. Augustus was the first Roman emperor, even though he never admitted it. Sorry, I was just checking to make sure this is right. So emperors ruled in Rome for the next 500 years. They ruled in Constantinople for 1,000 years after that. The teacher turned to one of the students. Luciano, who was Octavian? All the students turned to look at Luciano. I'm sorry, I wasn't listening. I was looking through the window. Luciano was embarrassed. Here is a statue of Caesar Augustus, first emperor of Rome. The teacher says, I accept your apology, Luciano. You were honest, but I don't want your apology. I want you to learn. Come up here near me and take a seat. Luciano picked up his things and quickly moved to his new seat. Tonight, I want everyone to read about the early Roman emperors who followed Augustus. Tomorrow, we will talk about them. Luciano, please stay. The rest of you may go home now. Now, when the other students had gone, the teacher spoke to Luciano. Today was your last day looking through the window during class. Tomorrow is your first day as a student. The teacher smiled as Luciano sighed. The teacher continued. You will tell the class about the years of the great Roman peace called the Pax Romana. Your homework, here's the Pax Romana. Your homework is to read about this time in the early days of the Roman Empire. Luciano thought about his task as he walked home. The streets of Rome were crowded and noisy. He wondered if Rome had been this crowded during the time of the emperors. When Luciano got home, he began learning about the great Roman peace. He was still reading when his brother called him to dinner. The next day, Luciano took his seat in the classroom. The teacher told the class, "Luciano is going to tell us about the great Roman peace. Please listen carefully." Luciano stood up. For the first 200 years after Augustus, the Roman Empire was mostly peaceful, he said. The people of the Roman world were safe from civil war. The empire grew larger and wealthier than ever before. During this time, most of the emperors were wise and generous. Only a few were mean and selfish, he said. "Thank you, Luciano. You have done well," said the teacher. Luciano was happy. He enjoyed reading about the history of his city. After school, the teacher said, "Tomorrow you will tell us about the early Christians who lived during this time." So far, it's got some good research. That was a time of peace for 200 years after Augustus Caesar. Now, the next day, Luciano shared what he had learned about the Christians now. The early Christians were people who followed the teachings of Jesus. They believed in one God. They also believed it was most important to live in God's kingdom after they died. The Romans did not like the idea of any kingdom being more important than Rome. Now, the Christians respected the government and paid their taxes. Still, though, many Romans thought the Christians were dangerous to Rome. The Romans were always afraid of angering the gods. They wanted everyone in the empire to worship their own gods and the Roman gods too. So to them, they think that's kind of a compromise because they've got their gods and then it would just be adding on to other gods. But that goes against the beliefs in Christianity that there's only one God. And that would be, it would be wrong to worship anybody else other than the one God. Now this way, the Romans thought no gods would get angry and punish the Romans. Now the Romans thought that the Christians were careless. The Christians worshipped only one God. They would not worship the Roman gods. The Romans thought the Christians might anger the other gods. Then the whole human race would be in trouble. So it can feel kind of bad for the Romans because they were living in fear. They really were afraid that the gods and goddesses might punish them if there are these Christians around. Now the teacher smiled brightly. "Thank you, Luciano. You did a fine job again today." The teacher turned to the class. The Romans persecuted the Christians because of their religious beliefs. Persecute means to treat people cruelly and unfairly. So regardless of whether or not they were afraid for their own sake of the Roman gods and goddesses, they were still doing something very wrong by treating people cruelly and like they were below the rest of the Roman citizens. The teacher turned to the class. Romans persecuted the Christians because of their religious beliefs. Whenever something bad happened in Rome, the Romans blamed the Christians. Here's Nero playing music while Rome burned around him. We'll hear about Nero in just a minute. Now, for example, there was a terrible fire in 64 CE or 64 AD. Large areas of Rome were destroyed. The Emperor Nero blamed the Christians. Nero was a selfish man, though. According to legend, he cared so little about Rome that he played a musical instrument called a lyre while the city burned. Today, we have an expression, fiddling while Rome burns. It means paying no attention to great disasters happening around you. And we've seen things kind of like this in Black Beauty, where there are people being really ignorant, right? Where they should have noticed some bad things happening, like if Black Beauty's hoof was in bad shape, but they are just not paying attention, and that can be so terrible. So Nero, he wasn't even paying attention, even though he really knew what was happening. And he was too focused on other things and not being sympathetic to all the people who are really struggling and possibly dying in this fire. At times, the Christians were treated as criminals. They were put in prison or killed. Sometimes Christians were made to face wild animals in the Colosseum. The Romans persecuted the Christians for many years. It was dangerous to be a Christian. Still, the number of Christians continued to grow. This is because the Christians welcomed poor people and enslaved people. Christians promised a better life in the next world after death. This was appealing to those who suffered in the Roman world. And it would be appealing to anybody. So even if they had to go through persecution and people being terrible to them, they were thrown to the lions and the Colosseum, it wasn't so bad if they had the faith that they would be going to heaven, to an afterlife that was going to be perfect and peaceful after they died. So that was going to give them hope, and it gives someone courage to do what they believe is right, even if there's suffering at first that goes along with that. So I guess it didn't talk as much about Nero as I thought it would, but we'll continue hearing more about the emperors who followed Caesar Augustus in the next chapter as well, which we'll read on Wednesday. That is all for now. If you have any questions about Christianity, that might be a good conversation for you guys to have with your parents at home, because I know we have people from different religions within our own class, and definitely across our country, we have different religions. So that would be a good conversation topic if you've got questions about the difference between your religion and Christianity, or if you're a Christian, what it means to have this as the foundation of your faith and religion, to have gone through like what it means to have these people who are persecuted, and why it's courageous for them to have gone through that. So that's all for today. You've got some notes to take tomorrow, and I will talk to you later. Bye.